Glenn, thank you so much for talking to us today.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for coming.
So could you give us a brief overview of this exhibition?
Sure. This is Beazley Designs of the Year here at the Design Museum, and it's a survey of what's happened that's most exciting in design across the world over the last year. It's the 10th anniversary of the exhibition series, so we also wanted to do something quite ambitious and monumental, so we've built this great surrounding enclosure for the designs, and there are 62 in all.
So 62 designs or 62 exhibitors?
62 design projects, and each of those has a team behind them, of course. So it could be an architecture studio, it could be a group of political protesters, it could be an artist. So there's all sorts of different people who have made these designs happen.
And were you involved in the selection process?
I was. So we have a nomination pool. We go out to curators and other specialists around the world and ask them for their suggestions. And we get many, many suggestions, hundreds. And then together with the team here at the museum, I narrow that down to the short list. And then finally, we'll have a jury that considers that short list, and they'll actually give the top award and then an award in each category: product, fashion, transport, and so forth.
Wow, so it's a very complicated process.
Yeah, it is complicated, and it happens super fast. So the show actually came together in about 6 months. So it's very much to really put your finger on what's happening in design right at the moment, really in its moment of invention, so the cutting edge stuff.
Wow. So how did you get involved in this exhibition, this competition?
Yeah, I'm based in New York City, so it's maybe a little surprising that I would be the curator from that distance, but I used to live here in London. I was at the Victoria and Albert Museum, and I know the folks here at the Design Museum, of course, really well, and have had a lot of, happy collaborative opportunities with them in the past, and it's great to be able to do this show now.
Cool. So you were just invited over to be the guest curator for this?
Yeah. So I think this is the first time they've used a guest curator, actually. And again, it's sort of to mark the occasion of the 10th anniversary. We also did do a film, which people can see in the show or online, which is called Designs of the Century So Far. And that looks back at the last 10 years of the exhibition series. And one interesting thing is to think about which designs actually got awards and which didn't. So, for example, the iPhone was nominated, but it didn't win that year, which in retrospect seems a bit funny. But it just shows you that design obviously looks quite different in the rearview mirror. And we've thought a lot about what it means to be trying to evaluate design when it's hot off the press, as opposed to once you have been, having it in your life for 3, 4, 5, 10 years.
God. That's so interesting about the iPhone. So what practical tasks did you have to do to get this to be here today?
Many practical tasks required. As you can imagine, with over 60 nominators from all over the world and also working in all these different sectors and trades and industries, it's just incredibly diverse. So you have all sorts of questions coming up. So everything from how do you show a pussy hat to what do you do with a purely digital design or a virtual reality experience, to what's the best way to show a gigantic building. Sometimes you can get a beautiful handmade model. Sometimes you end up using a video that sort of takes people inside and outside the building. It's just very, very varied, and each design has been considered sort of on its own terms. So that's another very interesting thing, at least for me, about the show, is that it's almost like a catalog of different ways that you can show design to the public. Okay.
That sounds really complex. Fair play for getting it all done.
Yeah, it's sort of complex behind the scenes, but it's actually, you're seeing it for the first time yourself. Yes. But, I hope it seems actually quite understandable when you're here.
It's very coherent because, I mean, sure, I go to exhibitions all the time, and I have to say you can really kind of, it's got a very good through line, very well curated.
Thanks.
I would say, definitely.
Yeah, it's also just a really exciting narrative because you're really looking at what's happened in design in the past year and how also designers have responded to things. So, for example, to the refugee crisis, that's a big theme in the show.
Right behind us here, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there are many designers who have put their minds to that task, either creating symbolic responses to the refugee crisis, like the refugee flag that Yara Saeed designed, or this map behind me is actually the map of the Calais jungle, the notorious refugee camp that was in France. Is destroyed now, but we worked with a group of designers who had created a youth shelter within that very difficult situation and had really improved a lot of people's lives in a very important way. So we also wanted to acknowledge that kind of design on the front lines of change.
Yeah, wow, it's incredible. So you might not be able to answer this, but do you have any highlights?
highlights. Well, in a way, they're all highlights, of
Yes,
course.
of
Otherwise, they
course.
wouldn't be here. I do think the refugee flag is quite a powerful design, and partly the fact that it was designed by somebody who was herself a refugee. That's, I think, says a lot about the way that people can use design to represent their experience. I often also mentioned the African American Museum in Washington, D.C. This is part of the Smithsonian. So that was designed by David Adjaye, the British architect. And certainly for me as an American, seeing finally an institution that speaks to the Black experience is very, very meaningful.
Yeah.
And having been to the museum myself, I can say it is an absolutely amazing building, and it has a very, very powerful narrative inside it as well.
And what's nominated for design? Is it the building itself or is it the exhibition?
So in that case, it's the architecture.
Architecture.
So it is the building, but it's a good example of how you can't categorize things that easily.
Yeah.
So it's, in a way, it's a building wrapped around a story.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons it is so powerful.
Oh, so you kind of had to get it into the exhibition on the architecture
In the architecture category.
Yeah.
But it also is, if you like, a feat of curatorial narrative.
Yeah, totally. So obviously, because we're a platform that targets millennials,
Yeah.
we mentioned Kanye.
Yeah,
So
sure.
Kanye in the exhibition. How
Yeah.
did he qualify?
So, yes, there's been a lot of interest in the idea that Kanye would be nominated, particularly in the fashion category, because he's a musician, obviously.
Yes.
But one of the really interesting things about that project is the ingenious way that he's flipping the usual priority of promotion.
I actually read the
Yeah.
thing, yeah.
So the idea here would be that normally, maybe there is no normally anymore, but in that, you might expect that there would be a lot of promotion effort put behind the album, and then the merchandise would be cooked up by somebody, and it would sort of be an afterthought.
Yeah.
And in this case, what Kanye did was to actually release the album for free and just sort of let it slip out
On Tidal,
online.
yeah.
And then to put a huge amount of effort behind the merchandise and also create these pop-up stores that created a lot of buzz and word of mouth. So he's really thinking of the merchandise as the product with the music backing it instead of the other way around.
Interesting. Okay, so that's
Yeah.
how he kind of made the cut in a way, because he kind of flipped it on its head.
That, and also I just think it's very interesting to think about creative celebrities like Kanye as designers.
Yeah.
Why not? I mean, he's reshaping our understanding of fashion as much as anybody else.
Yeah.
And that's another very important thing for me in the show. Like the Pussy Hat Project is another
Yes,
great
I
example
saw
of
those.
that.
Yeah, those are cool.
Yeah, so that's another example that's been very resonant over in the States. And that's an example where you have a group of artists, again, quite young, who are not professional designers. And in fact, they're not fashion people per se,
yeah.
but that's also in the fashion category. And obviously it's, drawn a lot of attention as a strategy for political protest. So how can you use pink yarn and turn it into something that can compete with the kind of media onslaught that's associated with American politics? And so that's quite fascinating as well. And it's
Yeah.
really all about who's making design and why. That's really what the show is about in its essence.